Hey, this is Kellan and Davin from Wiseacre Brewing Company.
Yeah, we're gonna sort of tell the story of the Tennessee Brewery here.
And Davin is gonna let you know about the equipment and ingredients and process that all took place here back in the day.
Right, so much history, so many beautiful things inside of this old building, and just a lovely look at the guts of a very old brewery.
Cool, rare thing, let's check it out.
The way breweries were built back in the day is everything was done using gravity. What happened is that they would bring the malt in on trains in huge truckloads, and they would drop it all into bins outside. Then you would have these large bucket elevators that would bring the malt all the way up from the bottom. This huge iron behemoth hanging from the ceiling is a malt cleaner. In the days of these breweries, there would be a lot of other things in your malt. So you'd have, I don't know, mice, little pieces of iron. This also had an enormous vacuum, and this would suck all of the dust off of the grain and convey that out. They have added a separate way to get grain into their stream.
They're probably making pale ale here, they're adding crystal malt, caramel malt, something like that.
Right, they were probably getting 100,000 pound grain deliveries on probably a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Coming from up there where they would take all the mice out of the malt, it would drop down into this room. This just held an enormous funnel, so it would hold all of the clean malt for the next brew that was coming up. Just a little holding spot.
Moving on.
That's kind of it.
So this room is the most Scooby-Doo room, I think, in the whole place. We've got
pretty creepy.
Rusty metal, hooks on the ceiling, bricks, a trapdoor, leather belts and straps everywhere. What's going on in here?
So this is where all the malt came into the building. So the two bucket elevators over here would convey the malt up from street level. It would get carried across in this screw auger here, where it dumped into the large bin below us. What looks like a floor here is actually the top of an enormous grain holding bin.
Got it. So we're checking out the mill now. This is really important. I guess grain has a husk.
Right, you want to separate the husk from the inside of the grain. Right here would have been a large grist mill. So that would have crushed the grain into a bunch of tiny little pieces.
We got these crazy leather belts over here and pulleys, which probably added a good rattle and hum to the brewery.
I'm sure it was quite loud.
So we're right next to the mighty Mississippi, but they had their own well here apparently.
Yeah, and this was sort of the water plant for the rest of the brewery. So this would have been just one gigantic hot water tank, and over here would have been a cold water tank. So you need large amounts of both hot and cold water in order to make beer. So it's best to have a large amount of it at a high point so you can get it fast down below.
Cool, it's a beautiful room.
It is. Yeah, so this is the area where they did the grist hydration. So all of the malt would have dropped into here after it was milled. This is where they would mix it with some of the hot water from the hot water tanks that were above us.
It's kind of the first microscopic magical moment of brewing where something happens that you can't see, but that enzyme turning starches to sugars all here.
It is.
So if you're on a brewery tour in 1898, things are probably starting to really make sense. It looks like you're really making beer in here, right? This was a mash cooker?
This was an enormous iron cooker that took corn and broke it down to its least common denominator. It's called gelatinization. We're making little teeny tiny starches that our enzymes from the malt can break down into sugars.
But it's probably 200 plus degrees, so if you're on that brewery tour, you're probably trying to move on pretty quick.
You're probably trying to shed your woolen layers as quickly as possible.
So we finally made it to the brew house proper. Even if you're looking at modern day breweries like Sierra Nevada with their huge copper kettles, this is where we are, right?
Yeah, so this would have held the lauter tun, the all-important process of separating your liquids from your solids. So up on the ceiling, we've got the corn hole where the cooked corn would drop through into the mash tun, as well as the hydrated malt. Those two things would combine together in this one enormous tank where it would get run off. So once you've got your clean, clear wort, you're gonna send it over here to the kettle. This was an enormous kettle. This was a 325 barrel kettle that filled up this entire area as well as some of the area below us.
This is probably the most exciting vessel people think about when you're making beer. So the boil kettle. So you're boiling some for sanitary purposes, but also for top addition.
So this is where the hops would have been added and the hops would have been boiled here to create that bitterness that's necessary in beer.
So one of the coolest parts about this is to think about, back then this is one of the biggest buildings in the city. Let's say you're in a steamboat, going down the Mississippi, and this thing is just pumping out steam. It's just all that heat making steam. It's going out the roof. The whole area just smells like, beer, smells like wort that you're making right here. So kind of a cool visual. So we are below the brew house here in the Tennessee Brewery, and there's probably 3 things worth talking about in here. The first would be this hop strainer that would sit over there.
Right, so there was a large hop strainer on the floor right here in front of us. That separated the hop cones from the liquid. So if you can imagine, it's a little bit like tea. So you wanna run the wort over the cones and extract all of their goodness.
And finally, it goes to the only pump probably in the whole building for knockout.
Right. This one pump would take all of the strained wort and send it back upstairs to the wort chiller.
And then you just have to wait about a month before you finally have beer. So let's follow the liquid up.
Let's go.
All right, so the wort, the pre-beer juice, sugars from malt, mixed in water. I know it got pumped from the ground up to here, but I don't know what's going on in here.
This part of the room that we're standing in held an enormous wort tank. And right over here, there was a great big water tank that they would use to counter the heat from the wort still here for the next step, which was cooling off this giant bucket of hot sugar water. So in here, you would have had the wort cooling room. We're standing on the pad where the wort chiller was originally. So this array of pipework here would bring the pre-beer in, and it would get poured down over an enormous copper contraption that used to sit right here. All of that would cool the wort significantly.
So this is important for yeast wrangling?
It is, right. You don't want to cook your yeast, you want to make happy little cells that eat your sugar and make delicious fermentable products for us.
My first thought when we came in here was that this is, break time. They used to run across hot coals, like old-timey practice.
Why does nobody care about this as much as me?
We're in this gravity-fed brewery, so I know everything went down on the grain side, came back up. Now we're going down on the cold side on fermentation. This was the start of the cellar, right?
Yeah, this was the starting cellar. So the yeast would have been pitched into smaller, shallower tanks here to get the yeast well mixed into the wort. And there was also probably some aeration going on in here as well, where they would whip some air into the beer so that the yeast would have a chance to grow more of itself.
This is fermentation.
This is fermentation. So this contained, I think, 20 horizontal fermenting tanks all through this long hall here. So it was good to have a long tank where you could have the yeast have a large surface area to settle out onto, so you could have clear beer later on.
And how much beer were they kicking out a year in this place?
250,000 barrels at max. So for some reference, Wiseacre did 5,000 barrels last year, so we're not quite there. Hopefully we're headed that way.
This room is amazing. Lagering comes, it's a German word. It means to lay down, to store something of the sort. They kind of came across lagers on accident. They were, storing beer in caves, and it kind of created a new style, right? Yeah. We feel like we're in a cave a little bit right now, full with dripping water. So, yeah, this was their cave.
Right. So particular yeast strains do better in colder temperatures. So this large hall held all of their tanks that kept beer for long periods of time in very cold temperatures in order to help yeast settle out and to make a very clean, crisp tasting beer. Let's go down to see where the finished beer ended up.
Okay. I guess ale yeast, depending on what kind, will leave different fruity, spicy notes in beer. This was mostly a lager brewery, right? So they want to get rid of that because lager yeast can make kind of sulfury flavors.
Right. So this would be just an area where they would finish up the lagering process. So breweries like Anheuser-Busch would use beechwood chips and the yeast would settle out onto those beechwood chips and make for a cleaner, well, more clear beer.
All right, so this was kind of like the money photography shot, right? Like huge wooden vats, dudes wearing overalls, and a lot of manual labor packaging.
Right, this would be a definite hub of activity. A lot of workers down here doing bottling, doing kegging before the delicious beer went out to the world.
Right, so this is the last step. We can go out to the courtyard, I guess right before people finally get beer delivered, people get to drink, and let's go check that out. So we're down here in the great courtyard, which was once covered at the Tennessee Brewery. We just left the cellar where finished beer was coming out.
Right, so back here behind this lovely brick facade was the bottling and kegging operations. So once all of that got filled, it could come out of this doorway here, where it would be loaded onto carriages, horses and buggies, people's buckets.
In a train eventually.
Right,
yeah.
And there were train tracks going behind the brewery, so that could take it out to all the people to have a tall, cold one.
Right, and after hiking up and down 4 or 5 floors, following liquid, people finally get to drink a beer.
Yeah, and I get to finally drink a beer.
Cheers, man, let's go.